This was about 10 years ago, somewhere around 2015 or 2016, back when I was living with someone who worked the complete opposite hours of me. He did graveyard shifts, and I worked normal daytime hours, so most nights during the week, I'd be home alone while he was gone. One night, I was feeling especially lonely and annoyed because the toy I normally used had finally given out. Since it was already late and I didn't feel like waiting days for something to show up in the mail, I decided to drive downtown to the 24-hour adult store. The town I live in is pretty average, mostly residential, nothing wild, and the little downtown area is basically just a cluster of bars, restaurants, and a few shops right before the freeway entrance. The store was only a 10-minute drive from my apartment. I parked in the back lot, which was darker than I expected, considering how many businesses were around. There were several little walkways and alleys connecting the bars and restaurants to the lot, so you never really knew who might wander through. I locked my car and started heading toward the front entrance on the street side. To get there, I had to pass the driveway I'd just come in through. And that's when I noticed a man standing off to the side, smoking by himself. It was about 1 in the morning, and it felt strange that he was the only person out there. I figured he was probably just a bar customer taking a smoke break before heading back inside. But the moment I passed him, he greeted me. I mumbled a quick hi back without looking at him, hoping that would be the end of it. As I walked by, I got a better look at him. He had a shaved head, an oversized white t-shirt, long shorts that hung below his knees, sneakers, and tall tube socks pulled almost all the way up. Nothing unusual for the area, but something about the way he lingered alone and immediately focused on me made me uneasy. And before I'd even reached the store entrance, I saw him start following behind me. Not casually, not like someone who just happened to be heading the same direction, but matching my pace as soon as I passed him. At that time of night, a man trailing closely behind you is never a good sign. I looked down the empty street, trying to figure out what the smartest move was. At first, I thought about walking farther so he wouldn't know I was headed into the adult store. But the street was silent and dark, and that felt like a worse idea. Then I thought about ducking into one of the bars, but I knew that would give him a chance to corner me or start talking to me. So my safest option was to go straight into the store where the lights were bright and someone else would be around inside. I pretended to shop like nothing was happening. The man came in right after me, but he didn't bother pretending he was there for a reason. He just hovered near the front of the store, sitting by the door, keeping himself where he could watch me. While I walked around looking for what I needed, I heard a sharp sound. I ignored it. And again, he wasn't browsing, and he wasn't trying to be subtle. When I finally approached the cashier, the employee seemed aware of what was going on. I tried to quietly ask whether he knew the man or if he worked there, but the cashier kept asking me to. Eventually, normally, and I told him hadn't left me alone since I also parked in the back lot and didn't feel safe walking out there by myself. He walked to the front and from behind the counter told the man to leave. Then he came back and told me the guy was supposed to be gone, but he wasn't. He stayed right where he was. I kept pretending to shop, glancing up every so often. And every time I looked, he was still sitting there watching the store. The cashier finally walked back up again and raised his voice, telling the man to get out. While he handled that, I went to the far back corner of the store just to stay out of sight for a moment. When I circled back, the man was finally gone. The cashier told me he had asked him repeatedly. And when the guy pretended not to understand English, he pulled out a baton from under the counter and held it up. Only then did the man actually leave. Even with that, I was still anxious about the walk to my car. I was parked near the driveway, not far from the entrance, but it still felt unsafe. The cashier pointed to the small monitor behind him, showing the security camera angles. He said he'd keep an eye on me and told me to come right back inside if I saw the man anywhere. He couldn't walk me out himself because he was the only employee team about 7 years back. I had just gone through a rough end to what I thought counted as a relationship at that age, and an older girl I was close with told me she'd call later that night to check on me. I stayed up far longer than I should have, waiting for a phone call that clearly wasn't happening. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, the kind of late where the house feels unnaturally quiet. When my phone finally rang, I was so sure it was Jessie that I answered without looking at the screen. I explained everything that had happened, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. It sounded rough and too low, almost like someone trying to talk through a half-blocked throat. Even now, I can still remember the tone of it. It wasn't something I'd heard before. Whoever it was tried to respond as if they were following along with my story. After a minute, I asked why their voice sounded different. They immediately said they had a bad cold. The excuse felt lazy, and I already suspected it wasn't Jessie. But I was curious enough to keep talking just to see where this was going. The first thing this person asked was what I looked like. I laughed a little and told them I looked the same as I did earlier when they supposedly saw me. They brushed it off by saying their memory felt foggy and wanted me to describe myself. For some reason, I did. After that, I asked directly if they were actually Jessie. They dodged the question twice, insisting that they were, until I made it clear I wouldn't be upset either way. I just wanted to know who was on the phone. That was when the voice finally said his name was Jack. That name meant nothing to me. I didn't know any Jack, so I asked how he got my number. He said he got it from a girl at a party and that whoever gave it to him must have meant to give him a fake number, but he liked the way I sounded better. Anyway, for a moment, I assumed it was some kid from school messing with me and giving my number out. I asked what she looked like, and he answered instantly that he couldn't remember. That didn't help settle anything. We kept talking for a little while. He asked my age, so I told him, and when he told me he was 24, it threw me off. The age difference didn't bother me yet, but it definitely changed the tone of the conversation. He shifted into asking personal questions, starting with what I was wearing. I didn't think much of it and described my pajamas, simple Kaddish ones with little cats printed on them. I didn't understand why he'd even care. Then he asked what school I went to, so I told him. He said he lived in Little Italy, which was close enough to my school that I knew the streets he was talking about. After that, he asked which bus I took home. Without thinking, I told him that too. He said he might have seen me riding it. That was the first thing that genuinely unsettled me. We talked a little longer before I went to bed, and I figured the whole conversation would fade into nothing. But every few months after that, he'd call again, always ridiculously late at night. The questions became more focused, always starting with what I was wearing. Then he'd describe girls he'd seen on the bus who looked like me, telling me exactly what they were wearing and asking whether any of those sightings were me. I never recognized the descriptions. He always tried to convince me to come over to a party, and whenever I questioned why he'd be on the phone during a supposed party, he'd say it was a party for one or a party for two, just us. By then I was genuinely nervous every time his name came to mind, but I was too inexperienced to handle it properly. I told my friends, mostly boys my age, and they joked about showing up to his party to teach him a lesson. I didn't want anyone getting into a fight with some stranger who could be anyone, lonely, unstable, older, stronger. So, I brushed off their jokes and asked them not to get involved. One afternoon, I was at the mall with one of my closest friends, the kind of friend who naturally stepped into the older sister role. She didn't put up with anyone acting strange around me. I got a call from Jack while we were walking, and she immediately asked who it was. When she realized, she told me to hand her the phone. She didn't raise her voice, but she spoke in that tone people use when they're inches from losing patience. She told him she knew how old I was, told him he was out of line for calling a 14-year-old in the middle of the night, and warned him not to contact me again, or she'd make sure he regretted it. For a while, he actually disappeared. Then there was a night I had 2 friends sleeping over, including the protective one. We were settling down at around 3 or 4 in the morning when my phone rang again. Without thinking, I answered. The second he spoke, I knew it was Jack. My thoughts went completely blank, and my expression must have given everything away because my friend turned toward me immediately. Our eyes met, and she held out her hand. I tossed her the phone. She didn't waste a second. She let him have it. Her voice was sharp, steady, and loud enough that he couldn't talk over her. She repeated that I was 14, that she'd already warned him, that he had no business calling. Every time he tried to interrupt, all I could hear in the background was his voice trying to ask if he could talk to the first girl. Meaning, he kept repeating it, almost panicking, begging to talk to me. She ignored every word he said and kept going until he finally went silent. After that night, he never called again. A long time later, maybe months, maybe a year or more, I was out with my mom in Little Italy. We almost never went down that specific street, but the moment I realized where we were, I felt myself tense up. My mom noticed and asked why I looked so on edge. I told her about a guy named Jack who lived around that area and how he used to call me. As soon as I said the name, her whole expression changed. She told me that back when she was young, she worked at an old toy store in that same neighborhood. The manager there was in his early 30s at the time, and his name was Jack. She said he always made her uneasy. The way he acted around kids, the way he spoke to the teenage girls who worked under him. She eventually quit because she felt something was seriously wrong with him. She described him to me, and although I never saw the man on the phone, a lot of what she said lined up in a way I didn't like thinking about. Maybe it was just a coincidence. There are plenty of people named Jack, but standing on that street with her, everything felt a little too close to be comfortable. This happened about 12 years ago when I was 16, and my friend Jen was a year younger. We lived in a small town that didn't have much going on besides a bunch of retirees and an overactive police department that treated curfew like a sacred rule. One night, I was staying over at Jen's place. We'd been hanging out for hours, and I was already half asleep as I pulled out the futon. I was about to get comfortable when she suddenly came over and asked if I wanted to sneak out. It was almost midnight, the entire neighborhood dead quiet, and I immediately told her no. Her mom ran a strict household, and I didn't feel like being caught up in anything that would get both of us grounded for weeks. Jen just shrugged and said she'd go without me. That hit me in a way I couldn't ignore. I couldn't explain why, but I had this sinking sense that if she went alone, something was going to go very wrong. Sure, kids in our town snuck around at night sometimes, but something about that moment felt different, like we'd be walking into trouble that didn't have anything to do with curfew. I'm naturally on edge about things anyway, so the feeling didn't go away. I tried talking her out of it again, but she was set on going, so I ended up trailing after her, annoyed and tense, while the both of us stepped out into a quiet street with only the occasional porch light breaking up the darkness. Not far from her house, we saw two big guys ripping down road signs. One of them was tall enough that he stood out even from a distance, and the other wasn't much shorter. They were both solid built, the kind of people you wouldn't want to be around if anything went sideways. Jen, being Jen, acted like this was no big deal and walked straight over to them before I could stop her. The smell of alcohol and smoke hit us immediately. They were clearly high or drunk or both. They started making small talk and asked for our names. I gave them a fake one without hesitating. "Want to go to the park?" the taller guy asked. Jen said yes, like it was nothing. I followed along because I didn't want her wandering around with two strangers twice our size. They kept trying to ask things about me, and I answered with short, made-up details, keeping my hands in my hoodie so they couldn't see how tense I was. At the park, the two of them lit up again. They kept offering, and I kept turning it down. I barely said a word. Then things took a turn. The taller man asked if we wanted to go to their hangout. I looked directly at Jen, hoping she'd read the expression on my face, but she still agreed. They led us toward an old motel, the kind that looked like it had been slowly falling apart for years. When they opened the door to their room, it was a disaster. Trash everywhere. Clothes and random junk piled up across the floor. It didn't feel like a place anyone should step into. That was it for me. I grabbed Jen's wrist and yelled for her to run. We took off down the street, and the two men started after us. They followed for a couple of blocks, calling out, but eventually they gave up. We didn't stop running until we made it back to Jen's house. Once we got inside, I let her have it. I didn't hold back. And honestly, that night was the beginning of the end of our friendship. But things didn't just stop there. When I went home the next day, I told my parents everything. The town was small enough that running into people again wasn't unlikely, and we were right to be worried. A few days later, I was skateboarding home when I saw the tall guy coming out of a house and heading toward a bright red car. He lived right behind me. The look he gave me made it clear he recognized me, and whether he planned to follow me or not, I wasn't going to risk leading him straight to my place. I sped off and took a long, winding route back home, checking over my shoulder the whole time. I didn't see him again on that ride. I told my parents where he lived, but there wasn't much anyone could do without something more concrete happening. The next day, I was sitting outside when I saw him drive past our house. He slowed down when he spotted me. After that, every few days, he'd cruise by again, never stopping, never saying anything, just passing through in a way that made it clear he hadn't forgotten. Eventually, the drive-bys stopped. Word around town was that he moved away. I don't know what would have happened if Jen had gone alone that night, or if I hadn't insisted on going with her, but I'm glad we never found out. Last night turned into a lot more eventful than I expected. I was over at a classmate's place working on a group project that's due tomorrow. I live in an apartment near campus, but he still lives with his parents out in the foothills just outside town. Getting there means taking a narrow 2-lane road that cuts through a pretty empty stretch of woods for about 5 or 6 miles. We started working around 6, and after we wrapped everything up, we ended up talking for a while. So it was close to 11 by the time I headed out. I didn't really think about how different that road would feel at night. There were no streetlights, the pavement was rough, and there were potholes deep enough that I actually slowed to a crawl in a few spots because I'd already used my spare a couple weeks ago. On top of that, I didn't have cell service along most of the drive, so I was basically moving carefully and hoping nothing went wrong. I was about halfway back toward town when I came around a tight bend and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell sitting sideways across the road. It wasn't just stopped, it was angled in a way that blocked the entire lane. Both shoulders dropped off into shallow gullies, so driving around it wasn't an option. The only place I could go was backwards toward a small pull-off I remembered passing. At first, I couldn't see inside the truck at all. When I flicked on my high beams, I finally made out a guy leaning forward in the driver's seat with his head pressed against the steering wheel. He looked like he was unconscious, like he'd been in a bad crash, but the way the truck was positioned didn't look like a normal accident. Something about it felt too convenient, like it was set up in the worst possible spot on purpose. I'd heard stories about people staging things like this to get someone to step out of their car. I decided I wasn't going to find out the hard way. I put the car in reverse and started backing toward the pull-off, keeping my attention jumping between my rearview mirror and the truck. I was just about lined up to turn around when I glanced forward again and saw the driver, who had definitely been motionless a moment earlier, now out of the truck and moving toward me fast. At the same time, the camper shell opened and 2 or 3 more guys climbed out. They all started toward my car. I didn't even think. I just kept reversing straight into the pull-off. I hit something underneath the car pretty hard, but at that point, I didn't have room to care. I threw it into drive right as the first guy reached my passenger door and yanked at the handle. It was locked, thank God, and I only saw him for a moment as I took off. His face looked beat up and rough, like someone who had been using for a long time. I didn't slow down again until I pulled into my classmate's driveway. The whole way back, I kept checking the mirrors to see if anyone was behind me, but no headlights ever showed up. Once I got inside, I told him and his parents what happened, and we called the police. They told me they didn't find anyone matching the description when they checked the road, but they took my report and said they'd watch for similar vehicles in the area. His parents let me stay the night. Appreciated more than I probably. After what I'd just driven through, I wasn't about to try that road again until daylight. A couple of months ago, I ended up having one of the strangest late-night encounters of my life. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and I'd been sitting at my desk playing games for hours. Eventually, I got tired of staring at the screen and decided a walk would help clear my head. I live just outside a small Irish town, and since I'm in my 20s and have gone out at that hour plenty of times before, I didn't think twice about stepping outside. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my headphones, and followed my usual route along the road toward the bypass. The night air felt sharp but refreshing, and the streetlights kept everything bright enough that it seemed like it would be a quiet, easy walk. The bypass has a footpath that sits a little higher than the road, with a strip of trees pressed right up against it. That wooded area is basically pitch black after midnight, but I'd walked past it more times than I could count. I was through my phone trying to pick a song when I nearly collided with someone standing right in front of me. I hadn't seen a single person ahead of me seconds earlier, so the sudden appearance caught me off guard. When I looked up, I saw an older man in a brown coat. He looked like he was somewhere in his 70s, a bit shorter than me, and staring in a way that didn't tell me much about what he was thinking. He said something, but I only caught muffled syllables through my headphones, something that sounded like doggy. Thinking he might be looking for a missing pet, I pulled the headphones off and told him I hadn't seen any dogs around. He repeated himself, and even without the headphones, his words were hard to make out, but the final one came through clearly. Dad. I leaned in a little, trying to understand him better, and that's when I noticed the heavy smell of petrol coming from his clothes. He drew in a quick breath and said it again, this time more clearly. "Are you my daddy?" I didn't know what to make of that. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. I may be a third of his age, and the rest of me had no idea how to respond. After a second of standing there, not sure what to say, I asked if he needed help finding someone. I didn't love the idea of sticking around, but I also didn't want to walk away if the guy was genuinely confused or lost. He took another sharp breath and asked, "Where's my daddy?" I told him I didn't know and asked him where he last saw the person he was talking about. He hesitated, then pointed straight toward the dark section of trees beside us. I couldn't see a thing past the first couple of branches. I was still trying to figure out whether I should call for help when his expression suddenly shifted. He muttered something under his breath and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out what at first just looked like a wad of wet fabric. When I focused on it, I realized it was a small dead bird. He stared at it for a moment, grumbled again, then looked back at me. That was the point where I decided I was completely out of my depth. I lowered my eyes to my phone, thinking about calling someone, when a loud crack came from the trees to my right. Not a random rustle, something solid snapping under weight. Then a very clear, very human shushing sound followed it. Everything inside me tensed. I told the older man I couldn't help and immediately started walking toward town, picking up my pace fast. As soon as I heard steps coming out of the trees behind me, that walk turned into a full sprint. I ran toward the crossing and risked a quick look back. A large bald man had come out of the trees and was guiding the older guy back into them, staring at me the entire time. A second later, a torch beam cut through the branches. I ran straight through town without stopping and didn't slow down until I made it home. For the next couple of days, I checked the news, expecting to see something about a missing older man, but nothing ever came up. Nobody I know has mentioned anything about someone like him wandering around, and I haven't seen him again. Still not sure if I walked into an actual dangerous situation or just crossed paths with someone who wandered off and needed help. But the man in the trees made it feel like there was more to it than that. To give a clear picture of what I looked like at the time, this happened about 3 years ago. I was 26, around 5'5", curvy, about 175 pounds, with medium-length bleached blonde hair. That night, I was wearing black, high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. I was walking home late after leaving a friend's place. It was fully dark out, and Back then, I lived in a pretty rough part of a big city. I dealt with enough uncomfortable situations in that neighborhood that I had developed a kind of false confidence, like I understood the area well enough to dodge anything serious. Even so, I always stayed alert when walking alone. I was about halfway home, roughly 10 minutes from my apartment. Much at first. In that neighborhood, it wasn't unusual for guys to roll up on women walking alone. It was awful how normal it felt, but that was the reality of the area. I crossed the street out of habit, putting myself on the side, moving opposite the traffic the van was in. The van disappeared down a side street, but then reappeared and pulled up near me again. Even then, I wasn't afraid, just irritated. I'd been approached while wearing outfits that covered me head to toe and while wearing ones that didn't, so I knew it wasn't about what I had on. I told the man closest to the window firmly, "I'm not interested." That was when I noticed there were actually two men inside. They looked incredibly similar, maybe brothers or even twins. Dark complexion, short dark hair, dark eyes. They stayed parked there watching me, which immediately raised my guard. I crossed the road again, expecting them to finally move on. Instead, they kept looping around, cutting across whichever side I switched to. That was the moment it stopped feeling like the usual street harassment and more like something was building toward a plan. Eventually, they sped past me with the rest of the traffic, and I yelled at them to leave me alone. It seemed to work. A few minutes passed without seeing them, and I let myself think they'd finally given up. Just to be safe, I pulled out my phone and was about to call my sister, who I lived with at the time. Before I could dial, the van shot up beside me again fast. One of the men jumped out, yanked open the back door, and came toward me with a pace and posture that left no question about what he intended to do. The street around us was suddenly empty of cars. I realized immediately that must have been the moment they were waiting for. He was just a step away from grabbing me when I tilted my phone toward him and said as steadily as I could, "You're being recorded on a live video call. My friends already have your license plate, and the police have been contacted." Inside, I was terrified, but I didn't let it show. He hesitated for a split second, staring at me like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. I angled my phone a little more, as if I were making sure the imaginary people on the other end could see him clearly. That was enough. He backed up quickly, jumped into the van, and they tore off down the road. I was shaken for weeks afterward. Honestly, I still hate walking alone now, even during the day. That incident took something from me, and I've never fully gotten it back. Stay safe out there.